It's fall, and a lot of people struggle with having a really nice garden in the fall. In a previous video, I went through the garden and took pictures of all the things that were flowering in October in my Zone 5 garden. That gave you some really good ideas about which plants you might add for a better fall display. And I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. But there's another secret that I didn't discuss in that video, and that is to make better use of non-flowering plants. In this video, what I'm going to do is show you a number of different plants that add a lot of color to your garden, both in summer and in fall. But in this video, I'll focus mostly on the things that add color in the fall. You don't always need flowers. And the advantage of using non-flowering plants to give you that color is that they are generally in color for a very long period of time. Behind me here you see a number of smaller beech trees, and they have that beautiful yellow this time of the year. And that lasts for a good month around here. Now let me show you some other things that you can use in your garden to beef up your fall garden display. Let's first have a look at some plants in the shade garden. This is Persicaria painter's palette. The common name is knotweed, but that term is used for a lot of different kinds of Persicaria, so it's not that useful. You can just call it painter's palette. It's a very interesting leaf. It has multiple colors, light greens, dark greens, a brown patch, and even some pink. Now you can grow this in sun or part shade, but I found it grows better in part shade. And here it is under a redbud tree. It does sucker a bit, but my plant's been here for a number of years and it's finally making its first sucker. So suckering doesn't seem to be a real problem. It does have a flower, but it's not very showy. So what you're really doing is growing it for the leaves. This plant looks nice all summer and fall. It really doesn't have a fall color. It just maintains that summer color late into the season. Here's one of my favorite shade garden plants. The stinking hellebore. The leaves are this dark bluish green. They have a nice shape. The whole plant makes a nice clump. It looks so different in texture from your hostas and your other shade garden plants. And even the color is different than most of those. What I really like about this plant is that it looks good like this all season long. Even in winter, if it's not fully covered in snow, you'll see the leaves. And they stay evergreen in my Zone 5 garden. Now it does flower some years. If we have a very cold winter, it seems to kill off the buds. But most of the time I do get flowering in spring. The flowers aren't that great. They're a chartreuse green, but they are interesting. In my garden, this plant seems to be short-lived. So after 3 or 4 years, it just dies out. But by that time, it's made some baby plants around the mother plant. And I am finding this coming up in various parts of the garden. I wouldn't call it invasive, but I am getting a few more seedlings than I really want. Good thing about this is that all my friends want this plant, and so it's pretty easy to get rid of in our Master Gardener plant sale. Here's an all-time favorite, Brunnera Jack Frost. Now you'll notice 2 different kinds of leaves here. The ones in the front is the proper coloration for Jack Frost. But I find that over time, this plant tends to revert to a more green color. And you can see the leaves at the back of the clump are starting to get a little less gray. When this happens, just dig those parts of the plant out and put them somewhere else in the garden or get rid of them. You want to try to maintain that original color. This is a great plant that makes a really nice clump. But I find that after about 3 to 4 years, it kind of gets tired and it just doesn't look quite as good. When that happens, dig it up, split the clump up, replant it, and the plant will be good for another 3 years. It does have these blue flowers early in the year, and after flowering I tend to cut them off because the dead seed heads spoil the look of the leaves. Now let's have a look at some sun-loving plants. This is Caryopteris snow fairy. That's one of the bluebeards. In Zone 5, this plant is root hardy, but the parts of the plant above the ground are not hardy here. It can take some light frost, so it lasts a fairly long time into the fall. Quite honestly, this plant just looks good all summer and fall. It does flower. You can see some buds just forming here, but the flowers are not that spectacular. You're really growing it for the leaves. Can you guess what this plant is? It's fairly popular in gardens, but when you look at it in fall, you might not recognize it. This is a balloon flower. This particular clump is about 2 or 3 feet tall and has nice white flowers, but you'll get the same fall coloration from even the blue flowering ones. And it is available as a shorter cultivar. It's very drought tolerant, easy to grow, gives you a great flower in the summer, and this nice fall coloration. This is Berberis Rose Glow, a Japanese barberry. It has great red coloration all year long, and in fall it creates these nice red berries. The problem with this plant is that it is invasive. It's not too bad in zone 5. I find very few seedlings of this plant, and it's not a problem in this area. But in warmer climates, it's filling a lot of areas with these thick, thorny plants. So be very careful where you plant this. Although this is a great plant, it's probably one that shouldn't be grown in zone 6 or warmer. There are new varieties of Japanese barberry that are sterile. One series of these is called worry-free. The plant does make berries, but the berries are completely sterile. As long as they're sterile, it won't spread into the environment. It's really too bad because this is a great plant. Are you looking for a ground cover that's a little higher than most ground covers? Have a look at Stephanandra. This is a shrub that's not grown very much, but I think it's a great plant for those trouble areas. Areas where you're not going to walk, where you'd like something that's 2 or 3 feet tall, and you want it completely covering the area because you don't want a weed in that area. Slopes on a hill are a great place for this. It has a nice green color most of the year. It flowers white. The flowers are not spectacular, but they're quite nice. And then in fall, it starts getting this nice red coloration. Now in this picture, the fall coloration is just starting. Before the leaves are finally finished, they'll be quite red. And the combination of small leaves, that maple leaf shape, and the red coloration is really nice. Now you might not think of evergreens as a great fall plant. Most of the summer they kind of disappear because everything else in the garden is green. But when those trees start turning color, that green really stands out. This is a picture of my neighbor's yard, and you can see the evergreens in the middle of the picture is just glowing because of all the reds and oranges around it. And of course, once all the leaves fall off and things get kind of boring, the evergreens look good all winter long. What a lot of people don't realize is that evergreens come in a variety of different sizes. Here's a picture of the white spruce, Picea glauca. It's a very common plant, but this thing is huge. It'll grow 50 feet tall, and it's just not suitable for most gardens. But that doesn't mean you can't have a white spruce in your garden. The dwarf Alberta spruce is very popular in gardens because it doesn't grow very tall. It grows about 2 to 4 inches per year, and it's going to take years for it to get that big. So this is a great garden spruce. You still think that's too big? Well, they come in even smaller versions. Here is the smallest evergreen in my garden, and it's a white spruce called Pixie Dust. This plant grows less than an inch a year. In 10 years, it will be 16 inches tall. You can see how small my plant is. It's sitting in a rock garden with very tiny plants, and it won't outgrow this space for a long time. When you're buying evergreens, decide on how big you want them to be. When plants are labeled with a size, it's usually the 10-year size. That tells you exactly how big this plant will be, and you can pick a plant that's perfect for the spot you have available for it. Here's another evergreen that should be grown much more in gardens. It's a Siberian cypress. Now lots of people grow horizontal junipers, and they're great plants, and they come in different heights and different colors. I'm finding that these junipers are getting diseases. The needles are going brown in the middle of summer. They're starting to fall off, which results in empty spots on your plant. It just doesn't look good in the summer. I also grow this Siberian cypress, and it doesn't seem to have any of these diseases. It also does a little better in part shade, very drought tolerant, grows low to the ground, and as a plus, it turns this nice reddish color in the fall, and it keeps this color all winter long. I'm now growing several cultivars of this plant, and it's hardy in zones 3 to 7. Give it a try. It's a great plant. Do you recognize this plant? Well, this is a clematis. By this time of year, the flowering is finished on it, but this clematis is still a star in the garden because of the seed heads. On some clematis, the seed heads become very large or very fuzzy, and they really stand out in the fall. I have this growing up Harry Lauder's walking stick, also called the contorted hazelnut, which is a great structure for the clematis. You get to see the flowers really well in the summer, and now you've got this great display of seed heads. Now, the contorted hazelnut is a great plant, but I wouldn't plant it. It tends to do fine for about 8 to 10 years, and then it gets a fungal disease that will kill it. There's nothing you can really do about it. Now, in future, I expect we'll be able to buy this plant in a disease-free form, but right now, if you do buy one, you're almost certainly going to lose it in a few years. This is a very unusual plant called Flueggea. I don't know of a common name for it. It's hardy in zone 3 to 7. You'll find it in very few gardens, but more people should really be growing this plant. It is one of the 50 fundamental herbs in Chinese herbalism. Interestingly, this shrub is dioecious, which means that there are male plants and female plants. For you to get seeds, you need one of each. That's not really a problem because you probably don't want a lot of seeds of this plant. If you have one of these shrubs in the garden, that's probably lots. And that's all I have is one shrub. But it does make seeds, so I know it's a female, and it's getting the male pollen from somewhere else. This is such an unusual shrub that I'm sure it doesn't grow in this area, but I'm pretty close to the university, and I know they have several plants in their gardens, so I guess the pollen is traveling several miles to my garden and pollinating my plant. It has a very open, flowing type of structure. The leaves are okay, they're nothing special to look at. The flowers aren't that special either, but in fall, this plant is a stunner. The leaves turn this bright yellow. Now, I grow about 500 different kinds of trees and shrubs, and this plant and the ginkgo are the ones that produce the nicest yellow fall color. I really love this plant. Another great group of plants for the fall are the ornamental grasses, and this little guy is one of my favorites. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of it. I think it's a type of Molinia. The flower heads are very dainty and airy, which makes the plant look great, especially in front of this darker green evergreen. What I really like about grasses is that they're going to look good all winter long. This one is called Karl Foerster. It's a very upright grass. The flower heads in fall have this beautiful light tan coloration that just stands out in the garden. The plant to the left of it is a yucca. They stay green all winter long. Here's another one of my favorite grasses. It's a Miscanthus Strictus. These are hardy in zone 1 to 9. I'm in zone 5, and Miscanthus don't really flower well here. They're just opening their flowers when we get our frost, so the seed heads never develop properly, and seeding around is not a big problem. But in zones 6 and higher, these are becoming very invasive. They're spreading around all over the place, so be very careful which Miscanthus you grow. Some of them are sterile. In the background is a very common echinacea, another great fall plant, and beside the grass is Russian sage. These are great plants for fall. They have this beautiful airy blue coloration in their flowers. They last right up till late fall until we have a very hard freeze. They're very drought tolerant. They're easy to grow. Most of the Russian sage tend to be a bit taller, which is all right in a larger garden, but they are now available as shorter plants. So you can get a 2-foot tall Russian sage if you don't have the space for these larger ones. I hope I've given you some great ideas about how you can add color to your garden without using flowers. Using this technique is particularly important in the fall when so much of what's around us is brown. But the same technique adds color to your spring garden and your summer garden. New gardeners are always looking at the flowers. More experienced gardeners know that if they can get the color from the plants, they'll get a much, much longer period of color in their garden. Go out and get some of these plants for yourself, and I know it will improve your garden. Now, I have several other videos about creating great fall gardens, and I'll put a link to those in the top right-hand corner. There's nothing as great as these yellows and oranges that we can appreciate all fall long. Have fun in the garden.